everyone, and welcome to the Family Treehouse, a podcast series brought to you by Story, where I chat with people that have a passion for genealogy, storytelling, or both. I am your host, Heather Haunert, and today I am very excited to chat with Mr. Thomas MacEntee of Genealogy Bargains. If you have not checked out his website, you need to be there because it is absolutely amazing. Welcome, Thomas. So excited to have you today.
Thank you. I really appreciate this. And I always love to talk genealogy. I always say to people, have you heard the good word about genealogy? That's usually how I open a conversation. So.
Oh, well, great. We're super glad you're here today. So let's start by having you just tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started in family history and kind of storytelling.
Well, I'm a lifer when it comes to genealogy. I've been doing this for 45 years. I would say professionally for the past 13 years. But, I was a 14-year-old boy growing up in upstate New York, and I was staying with my great-grandparents. They had a big influence on my life. And this miniseries called Roots came on television in January of 1977. And if you do your research, you'll find that a lot of genealogists today of my age, the baby boomers, that's what hooked us. In fact, back then, librarians, they said, where did these people come from? Why are we getting people showing up asking about genealogy and family history? So that got me hooked because while we would watch the episodes together, we'd turn off the TV set and my great-grandmother would start to tell me stories about growing up in New York. Both my great-grandparents were born in the 1890s in New York, and my great-grandfather was born all the way upstate near Watertown. But I learned about my Irish ancestry, some of my German ancestry, and I got hooked. It is the stories that really bring people in. And that's what I've seen in the genealogy industry. That's the entry point. A recent one, we had a big surge last week with Juneteenth. People, and it was all over CNN, it was all over Today's Show, and it's the stories that bring people in. And then, so let's fast forward, and now keep in mind, Heather, this is all before the IBM PC, which came out in 1981. So I was old school, paper and pencil, microfilm, Soundex. No one knows what Soundex is anymore. So it was all.
No, what is that?
Oh my gosh, Soundex, Soundex. It was a way. It was a sort of a three-letter number coding of classifying last names to make it easier because these records on microfilm were not indexed. So you would have to go. I can tell you, my arm was so tired. But the thing is, if I wanted the Austin family, AUSTIN, I could look up the Soundex code and know on that microfilm which records they were, or, so that was, you can still find Soundex out there, but no one hardly uses it. And but also I went to college at the George Washington University in DC. So I had excellent resources like National Archives, Library of Congress, and all of that. So I landed in the IT field, information technology, worked for mostly major law firms across the country. We're talking, 2,000 attorneys, 17 foreign offices. I was doing anything and everything. And then the bottom fell out during the recession. A lot of those law firms went bankrupt. And I could see the writing on the wall that jobs for guys like me weren't coming back. So I said, why not start my own genealogy business? So what happened? My big opportunity, and it was luck, was that Forbes magazine wrote me up in an article called Career Shift, Turning a Hobby into a New Job in 2012. And that's when things really took off. People could see, oh, wow, this guy is doing this, And so that's really how I got started. I still do some of my own personal research. It never ends.
Yeah.
And that's an important point I want to bring up. A lot of people think that you have to finish your resource to write those stories, and it's not true. And I have some advice on that.
Great. Yeah. That is something that does come up when I have conversations with other guests. And I think that's so important here. You are never done. Never done with your research.
And you don't have to write the big war and peace of the family history. And we'll get into it more. People, they feel that burden. Yes. And you've got to free yourself from that. And I think that you'll enjoy your research more, you'll enjoy the hunt more, and you'll be more productive.
Yeah, great. So tell us why you think that storytelling is such an important part of family history.
Well, personally and professionally, let's do personally. For me, the stories pulled me in as a 14-year-old boy. I had no idea that, my great grandfather was born in Lowville, New York. His father was a butcher that went bankrupt. There was a financial panic in 1903 I never knew about. And so you start with that family story, and the challenge is, oh, is this true? There's always a little bit of truth in it. And so also being of Irish descent, my great grandmother's maiden name was McGinnis. And there are Sullivans. In fact, I have my third great grandmother's wedding silver from 1857 in upstate New York. And it's amazing. And and so the thing is, those Irish people have a gift of gab. And, the thing is, those stories, well, some people like to exaggerate big, they remember big. And so that was, while it's fun, it's also, I've had to take those stories. And it's never fun when you pop that balloon and you deflate it. And sometimes family members are upset. But the thing is, I like the sentimentality of those stories. But as a genealogist, I will always want to make sure I'm building a legacy when I do this. This is not just fun and games. Some sites have gamified genealogy and you click a leaf that shakes and boom. And, but am I really leaving a legacy? Now, professionally, I've written about 15 different books on Amazon. And I do a lot of teaching. And as I said before, that is the first entry point. Look at Ancestry's recent commercials. They're all touching upon family stories. In fact, there's one commercial, I think, for Pacific Northwest or one of the financial companies. And a woman's thinking about retirement, and she's looking back she's looking at traveling to Ireland in the future for her heritage. And I thought, oh, these guys get it. They get it. They get what the baby boomers are after. And this is something, a lot of people say, I'll do genealogy once I retire, or I'll do this. But I think post-COVID, we're realizing you've got to do your bucket list now. You cannot keep kicking that can down the road. So I think stories are an important part of bringing new people into genealogy. And there's you got to be careful the way you handle that. I've lost clients over a disagreement on a family story. But the thing is, I really think they are important. They're almost the most important part of genealogy.
They're what people remember.
Exactly.
For sure. How do you go about writing a story? You've got that little nugget and thought. So how do you go? What's your process to write the story?
I'm not a person of regrets, but if I did have one big regret, is not writing down those stories that I heard as a teenager. Because now here I am turning 61 and my recall is not as good as it was. So what I do is I do have a form that I've developed in Microsoft Word. And it's and I believe I have a link. We'll have a link to it in the show notes. It's basically, you give it a title and you write a source citation. I'm good about that, because you can write a source citation for a story as recalled by Thomas MacEntee, as told by his great grandmother Therese McGinnis Austin, and when it was told. And the whole idea is to get these stories in fixed format. And so you may be sitting on, I had a client that was sitting on old mini cassette tapes from the 70s to have them transcribed. But I think that's part of it and I do that almost every Sunday morning. I get up early and it's like, okay, the other day I wrote down my experience with 9/11, living in San Francisco, and my mother was in New York. And so it's these little things. You know what it does, Heather? It fills in that dash. A lot of times in genealogy, we're so hooked on birth date, end date, but what about that? What transpires in between? It's sort of putting flesh on the bones, and I think that's really, really important. And the other thing is why the form's important is I do two different keys in terms of finding aids. One is a source; it's a list of all the locations, because someone reading the story may not be familiar. I grew up in the Catskill Mountains, where a lot of the towns, it's the watershed for New York City. Reservoirs are built in the 40s and 50s. Some towns were just moved or obliterated. And so the other thing is people. No one, God bless them, no one in my family, at least my mother is one of 12 kids. None of them go by their real name. I have an Aunt Pudgy. Aunt Pudgy. I have an Uncle Jerry. He's actually Lee. Pudgy is Julia. And so the thing is, if you list the people, and then you list how they're related, because you may be saying, well, my great uncle, Lem, and you wouldn't know who that is. So I'll say that's Lemuel Austin, born 1950, and Lawrence was Butch. I mean,
Yeah.
it's funny. Out of all 12 kids, all the girls started with J and all the boys started with L. 8 girls and 4 boys. But I think that's really process. You know what? When I write these stories, and of course, I want to put them online. That's part of it. But I want them to live beyond me. I want to know 100 years from now, how is someone going to find those stories, and are they going to understand the story? And I think it's necessary to put that little key or legend at the bottom. These are the people I mentioned. These are the locations. Yeah.
Great tips there. It just makes me chuckle because I think what family does not have those people that have, all of those big names they go by.
Yeah.
Thomas, can you recommend any resources or tools besides and I will definitely link that cheat sheet in the show notes. Any other resources or tools you would suggest?
I have, to be honest, a true confession, fallen in love with story.com. What I like about it is I like the Pinterest type layout.
Yeah.
I like the ability to, and I've added a few things, especially around my mother's Alzheimer's. It started at age 59 in 2000.
Wow.
And she lived for 15 years with it. And so that's an important story that I wanted to document.
Yeah.
And then also I have about, right now, it's up to 35 different cheat sheets at Genealogy Bargains. They're 2-sided PDFs, and and they cover all the aspects. Like one thing that's coming up is I'm working on is transportation. What modes of transportation? My great-grandparents remember when the subway opened in 1904 in New York, or this big train accident in Brooklyn in 1918. What about railroads? A lot of my family worked on the railroads. Yeah. Brakemen, conductors, stevedores, things like that. And so you've got to go beyond just dates and important things. And so also Newspaper Archive, I was so glad that Story picked that up. Because I will say, people say, well, I have newspapers.com or I have Genealogy Bank. I'm sorry, no one site there are unique papers, and so that's really important. And then I've written an article that you'll post. It's called The Not So Private Lives of Our Ancestors. Heather, our concept of privacy is really a mid-20th century construct. Look at it, the Puritans. They didn't believe that you needed privacy because you would have been up to the devil's handiwork. You didn't need locks on the doors, right? There was no sense of privacy. In fact, my 9th great-grandfather, Hugo Freer, was a Huguenot, came over from France. He and his wife conceived and raised 9 kids in one big room around a hearth. Talk about lack of privacy.
Yeah.
But then if you go forward about 150 years, it was a sign that you were higher on the economic ladder when you had bedrooms upstairs. You could seal off from greeting your visitors.
Right.
That's how we progress. I think this whole idea, I always say, do you think that your ancestors had more or less privacy? I have a lecture on that. Did you know it was common in early 1900s for a hotel to list in the newspaper who was expected to check in that day? That blows me away. It blows me away. But the community felt they had a right to know. Your name was in the newspaper, letters waiting at the post office for people that were from out of town and visiting. It's amazing compared to what we have available today. So that's why I've written that article, and it's the Not So Private Lives of Our Ancestors. Thank God that they didn't have private lives. Otherwise, we wouldn't be finding these records. Yeah.
One of my favorites in the newspaper is always just makes me chuckle because as a kid, I remember hospital notes,
who was admitted to the hospital, and then my local radio station would read them on the Lulus. The other one you may not know about are the marital discord ads. So what happened is the husband did not want to be responsible for his wife's behavior or finances, had to make a public statement. And it usually went with, my wife has left the comfort and care of my board and bed, blah, blah, blah. Well, if you were lucky, the wife was not having any of this, and she'd come out with their own ad the next week. It goes back and forth. And there's, so it's one of those, usually it's listed under personals or legal notices. But, they are, women, unfortunately, were chattel up until the 1920s with the vote. And so, but that's another thing. You think, oh, it's like Jerry Springer, 1850 style. It's not. There was a reason. Also, why would the woman take out an ad in response. Well, if she could prove abuse or abandonment, she also wanted the sympathy of the community. She might need to get another man to take care of her because that's what it was.
Sure.
So, but the thing is, if you go in one thing that new genealogists suffer from is presentism. We think that the present status of privacy is what our ancestors operated under. And no, not at all.
Yeah, great conversation. I'm loving this.
Yeah.
How do you, this is a great question that kind of sparks, I don't want to say controversy, but it definitely is like the hot button item. How do you balance the importance of accuracy? Because that's obviously you need to have accuracy, but how do you balance that with telling a compelling story?
You are walking a balance beam, and I've done it many times because one of my lectures is also what's been done. What do you do when you inherit research from someone? It may be on a cocktail napkin. I picked up things during funerals. Funerals are a great way to do your genealogy. Or I'm giving something, and they treat it as a gift. They treat it as the Holy Grail. And then you get it and you notice, oh, yeah, this person wasn't a genealogist. They didn't use evidence evaluation. They didn't use a genealogical proof standard. And you don't like I said, deflating those sentimental stories. They have charm, but your goal is to really fully document. So I have one that I found out that my great grandparents got married. They fudged on their marriage date to cover pregnancy. So we always celebrated May 30th, 1915. And there was a 60th anniversary party. And then, of course, they pass away because they'd be rolling over in their graves. The fact that these are public records, but that anyone could go and access them. And I found out, oh no, the license was July 29th in Manhattan and marriage was like August 18th. And I'm on my fingers counting when my grandfather was born. And I since learned that the second and subsequent children can come after 9 months. The first one can come at any time.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. And the thing, what it does though? It humanizes them to me. They were very conservative. They were very button-up conservative, but it's more endearment that I know these things, And so, and I told, my cousins, I have 41 first cousins on my mother's side, and they all laugh at it now. They remember grandma and grandpa, but they think it's kind of charming, So this is why I use the family story form. I start with that and I go fact by fact and documents. And then sometimes in the conclusion, I'll say, I realized that this was one of the favorite stories of the family. It doesn't take away from that. But this is really what underlies it. The thing is, even if you have proof, there's some family members that are not going to accept it.
Sure.
It can cause some tension. But you've got to decide, are you just playing around with your research? Or are you leaving a legacy?
Right.
And that's what it comes down to. Yeah.
I love that idea of leaving the legacy. That's great.
Yeah.
So my favorite part is always having the favorite story or memorable story. And when I ask people, they're always like, well, I have a different one right now than it may have been, last week. So what is a favorite story or two you want to share with us? Yeah,
well, I have a new cheat sheet. It's called Documenting Family Stories in Writing, because it's all about getting it out of your brain. They say that when an elder dies, it's like burning down a library. That's a West African proverb. And it is. It can take just 3 generations to lose a family story. So that's why it's really imperative you do this. So the thing is, my favorite is about this photo. Now, this is a great mysterious photo. You can't fully see her face. It looks like it's 1920s. And on the back, all it says on the back is Mrs. Maurice Austin, Anna Austin, Dorothy and Eugene's mother, And that's it. My great-grandmother gave it to me in 1977 during the Roots period. And all she said was, oh, that's Morris Austin. So it was pronounced Morris. That's his wife. She was killed when a car ran up the curb in the Bronx and pinned her against a building. I didn't even know her maiden name. And that's all I had. So I started, and piece by piece by piece was able to find out everything about this. And it took so many twists and turns that I had to turn it into a lecture. It's called The Mysterious Death of Anna T. McPhillips. And it goes through, the fact is that her actual name was Rosanna. And then you want to get this. So I thought, I found the death certificate. I found where she died. on the Grand Concourse, which is a big boulevard in the Bronx, and the date. And I go and I want to see the newspaper. Well, I first go to New York Times, and there's a story about a runaway car in the Bronx on May 8th, 1925. And these kids had dislodged brakes and it ran down the hill and it hit a few people. But guess what? That wasn't my story. There were 2 runaway cars that day. How many?
Oh.
So the New York Evening Post had the actual story about my great grandmother. This man swerved to miss someone in the street. And keep in mind, 1925, people are, the economy's good. People are buying cars. It doesn't mean they can drive. And he actually swerved and he hit my great aunt and pinned her against the building. So, and they wound up suing. I found the lawsuit information. They won $10,000, which was a lot of money back then, because basically 2 kids were left behind without their mother. But the thing is, it's sort of, it was able to, what my great grandmother told me did have credence, but how you would never think there would be 2 stories in the New York City papers about runaway cars. Talk about weird.
That's crazy.
And so, but it also, this is how you have to sort it out, because they didn't list anyone. They didn't, in the New York Times article, they didn't list any names, and they didn't say whether someone had died. So you have to keep going. That's one of the things that new genealogists suffer from, is they'll find one birth record and say, boom, that's it. No, you've got to do a reasonably exhaustive search. So it's nice to now have the story behind this. And this was probably taken in 1923, about 2 years before she died. And so it's nice to amplify that family story and also share what is true and what is not true.
Yes, absolutely. That fantastic story. And just the fact that you kept going, I think that's such valuable advice, you found one article and a lot of people, like you said, would just stop at that.
Right, exactly. And the thing is, you've got to be curious, and you do, sometimes I call it a reasonably exhausted search, because I'm exhausted. But the thing is, when I work with clients, I use a research log, and sometimes I'll have 100 rows in Excel. Each one is a separate document. If I have 9 birth records from my great grandfather, I have to make sure they all, some will be better than others. Right. And that's what evidence evaluation brings you, is you weight those documents. A death certificate is, you have an informant. Informants don't always remember. I've only found one death certificate that was actually completed by the woman that died. And she had to be a genealogist. This is what happened. She was in hospice with no relatives. And I thought, damn it, I'm going to make sure this is right. So they had her pre-fill her death certificate. She's listed as the informant on her own death.
That is amazing.
Crazy, yeah.
But at least you know it's true.
Right, exactly. Right.
Oh, that's great. So Thomas, to kind of wrap up here, what are a few tips, tricks, pieces of advice or wisdom that you'd like to leave with our audience? Especially just those newbies, like you said, what's something that can help them?
I always tell my students that advice is autobiographical. That's what it is. I'm saying, this is my experience. Your mileage may vary, but this is how I did it. And some of these things may or may not work for you. But the first thing is to be committed. It really does take commitment and passion to do this, to preserve family history, to preserve family stories. Recognize the value of all the elements, what you hear, oral history, family stories, and also the focus on future generations. None of my 41 first cousins has stepped up yet and said, I want to take this over, when you depart. But what I am is I'm leaving all of this, both online as well, and digitizing and scanning. And you've got to have that approach, but be committed. The other one is be curious. Like I just said, you got to go beyond mere sleuthing, and you have to dig up various ways your family has preserved memories. My father-in-law has all his badges and medals from the Korean War. Those are important. Even the tiniest little thing, that you might find, what we call ephemera, paper, is important as well.
Yes.
Number 3 is be creative. Engage other family members, especially with a story. This is what I do. When I put that story in fixed form, it's my perspective. So I might get on the phone with my Aunt Ginny, who's Jennifer, another one of those names, and say, is this how you remember it? And document, I talked to Aunt Ginny on June 20th at 8 p.m. or we did a Zoom call and this is what she said. So you got to be a little bit creative with this stuff. And then also be content. Know that, what you're doing is important. Your ancestors probably were not world famous. Mine weren't. I think sometimes they come from 500 years of sheep herders, but it doesn't mean that their memories are undeserving of preservation,
Right.
And being passed down to future generations. We watch shows like Finding Your Roots, which I love. But I'm waiting. Who's going to bring out the book of life for me? No, you've got to work on that book,
Yep.
and they don't have to be famous. But make those ancestors celebrities in your own family history. That's
Right.
what you want to do. And be content that you are really preserving their legacy.
Right. I cannot thank you enough for being with me today.
Right.
Your expertise and your passion for family history is.
Yeah. Well, look at my back wall. Look at my family tree on the back wall. And I have that goes out to I actually know all 32 of my great grandparents.
That's
and
incredible.
Yeah. So back there, it's me, my parents, my grandparents, and then I have my great grandparents and my great greats back there.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
We should all be so lucky.
Yeah.
Well,
I enjoyed this too. I really did.
Yeah.
So
lots of hard work too.
Yeah, it is. The thing is, there's no easy button in genealogy.
Yeah.
There isn't. I mean, not to go against sites like Ancestry. Of course, they want it to seem easy, but you've got to go beyond what all these sites offer, and actually remember legacy. What if Ancestry went out of business in 90 days? Would you know how to download all your stuff? You should always have an escape plan for anything you upload, and you want to make sure. So if I were doing family stories now, I would make sure they're written or typed. That's one format. I would use a site like story.com that gives me online in the cloud. And then I also might back it up to an external hard drive or a USB flash drive in case something happens. It's called a 3-2-1 backup. And the thing is, so that's what it is that's what you want to do.
Yeah, it's very important.
Yeah.
Very important. Well, thank you for your time today.
Sure.
I have been completely honored to get to spend time with you this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I greatly appreciate it.
Great.
Next time, friends, embrace the power of your family's untold tales and embark on a journey of discovery. Let the ink flow and the words dance as you weave together the threads of your ancestors' lives. Start writing your family stories today and let their voices echo through the generations to come at story.com. And that brings us to the end of this episode of the Family Treehouse, where we celebrate the power of storytelling and preserving our family legacies. Storied is more than just a platform for sharing stories. Dive into those historical records and newspapers, discovering the hidden gems that bring your ancestors to life. Add branches to your family tree, connecting the dots between generations. Thank you for joining us on this storytelling journey. Your stories matter, and through Storied, they have the power to resonate across time and touch the hearts of generations to come. Keep uncovering your family's history and keep the spirit of storytelling alive with Storied.